Welcome to Zodiac Talks Tarot, where we read the sky with clear eyes, steady hearts, and just enough wit to keep destiny from getting melodramatic. Today's focus is Sagittarius, and yes, my intrepid archer, we're unpacking what looks like a serious problem but behaves like a sacred turnaround. If it feels as though life handed you a syllabus in hieroglyphs, take a breath. This isn't punishment, it's initiation chaos promoted to curriculum, with your higher self stepping in as professor and refusing to curve the grades. You are standing at the crossroads where forgiveness meets destiny, which is to say, you're being asked to stop reacting and start remembering who you are, one of the chosen ones of the Year of Triumph 2025, the cohort whose lessons arrive disguised as disasters and then quietly unfold as freedom. Lately your nights have turned into a cinema of symbols, feathers, thresholds, that person who still owes you closure and coffee money. And no, these aren't random reruns, they're dispatches from the deeper mind, the wild-haired librarian of your psyche sliding stamped memos across the counter while you sleep. In psychology, we'd call this the integration phase, when the nervous system stops sprinting and starts sorting, while in Buddhist terms it's the simple polishing of the mind's mirror until what's true stops flickering and starts reflecting. Either way, the message is precise. Forgiveness isn't capitulation, it's an eviction notice served to whoever's been living rent-free in your head. Write the dreams down, because your future self has a habit of sending riddles with shockingly practical answers. By mid-October one of those images will materialize not as fireworks, but as the quiet click of alignment you almost gave up on. I say this as a longtime researcher of human patterns and planetary rhythms. Perspective is the hinge on which fate swings, and Sagittarius is currently replacing a door. You are learning to distinguish what expands from what merely excites, and that is a graduate-level skill. Think of it as moving from reaction to authorship, swapping the adrenaline of drama for the oxygen of meaning. The humor helps yours, especially because laughter loosens the story just enough for wisdom to slip in. So here's our working thesis for today's reading. Treat your dreams like briefing notes, your conscience like a compass, and your boundaries like a well-lit doorway. Forgive what no longer fits, not because it deserves absolution but because you deserve bandwidth. The universe isn't asking you to go back, it's asking you to aim better. And if anyone questions your trajectory, tell them you're not running from the past, you're early to the future. Let's be honest, Sagittarius, the past year wasn't a simple emotional detour, it was a PhD in endurance with no syllabus and no coffee breaks. You didn't just survive the so-called dark night of the soul, you remodeled it, installed skylights, and gave the shadows better acoustics. Somewhere between heartbreak and revelation, you realized that spiritual growth doesn't come wrapped in scented candles and mantras. It often comes in the form of unanswered texts, cancelled plans, and a mirror that doesn't flatter but tells the truth. Yet this brutal honesty, uncomfortable as it was, has been your greatest teacher. Psychologically, you've been dismantling old wiring, the compulsion to rescue others, the chronic belief that being needed equals being loved. Slowly, you replaced the outdated narrative of "I must fix everyone" with the far wiser truth of "I must understand myself." It's not an ego shift, it's an energy audit. The universe doesn't promote those who shout the loudest but those who stay still long enough to hear their next assignment. That is the hidden curriculum of the chosen ones. The Year of Triumph 2025 doesn't reward intensity, it rewards integration. Then comes the parade of apologies. Ah yes, the season of hey, stranger messages, the digital hauntings from people who once treated your heart like an amusement park but now claim they've found religion, or at least found your number again. They appear holding metaphorical peace offerings polished with nostalgia, and for a second, you might wonder if forgiveness requires a reunion. It doesn't. In astrology, Mercury aligning with Jupiter favors conversation but crowns boundaries. You don't owe anyone a sequel just because the trailer looks remorseful. A simple "I wish you well" is sometimes the most enlightened sentence in the English language. Forgiveness is not a group project, it's graduation paperwork. The universe will handle their curriculum, yours is to release resentment without renewing the contract. Consider this the closing ceremony, not an encore. And with that, something magnificent happens. You gain altitude. A subtle but profound recalibration begins. You start seeing your past not as a series of betrayals but as a collection of spiritual internships. What once looked like loss now reads like pruning, the cosmic gardener trimming what you thought were flowers but were actually weeds choking your joy. The universe didn't steal from you, it cleared space for the harvest. In psychology, we call this cognitive reframing, the art of looking at the same facts through a cleaner lens. Spiritually, it's karma posing for its graduation photo. You're no longer addicted to chaos disguised as purpose, no longer seduced by the drama of constant self-improvement. Instead, you've fallen for the quiet allure of equilibrium. That's not detachment, that's enlightened intimacy with reality. It's the difference between trying to control the weather and learning to enjoy the breeze. And here's the curious twist: your calm becomes magnetic. People notice. The same crowd that once underestimated your silence now treats it like an oracle. The moment you stop auditioning for approval, the right kind of attention finds you. Someone new may even step forward, drawn less by your sparkle and more by your stillness. You're not chasing validation anymore, you're radiating discernment. The shift is subtle but seismic. Instead of seeking meaning through others, you've become the meaning in motion. From a Buddhist lens, this is the middle path realized not in theory but in muscle memory. You've discovered that peace isn't an inheritance, it's a structure you build daily, brick by mindful brick. Every boundary you uphold becomes a wall of that sanctuary, every act of kindness a window. You're learning to live from the center, where empathy doesn't mean exhaustion and love doesn't mean losing yourself. That's what the dark night was all along, a divine architecture project disguised as collapse. And now, in the gentle dawn that follows, you see that every heartbreak was a class, every silence a syllabus, every ending a kind of enlightenment. So laugh at the absurdity of it all, Sagittarius. After all, you're the only sign that can survive an existential crisis and make it sound like an adventure story. You've earned this peace not by avoiding the night but by learning to decorate it with stars. Every Sagittarian eventually discovers that their truest profession isn't the one printed on a business card, but the one carved quietly into their aura. Beneath the fire sign bravado and the philosophical banter lies something softer, wiser, almost medicinal. The great secret, one the cosmos keeps trying to remind you of, is that many Sagittarians are healers in disguise. Not the incense-burning, crystal-swinging type, although, knowing your curiosity, you've probably tried it once and set off a smoke alarm, but the kind who mends the world through laughter, through patience, through a particular refusal to stay bitter no matter how badly the plot twists. Your real magic isn't in the drama you survived, it's in the humor you tell about it afterward. When life hands you heartbreak, you turn it into stand-up material and accidentally cure someone else's loneliness in the process. In the year of triumph 2025, that ability becomes its own kind of currency. People will gravitate to your calm the way tourists sprint toward Wi-Fi at the airport. They can feel that you've stopped confusing kindness with compliance, that your serenity is not a costume but a craft. Whether you heal through teaching, through a perfectly timed joke, through art, leadership, or a well-timed silence, the source is the same divine current, simply changing wardrobe. You might never call yourself a healer, but your presence is already medicine. Buddhist philosophy would say that when the mind heals, the body bows in gratitude, and lately, even your posture seems to know this. Your shoulders, once trained to brace against every storm, are remembering they were meant to carry wings, not weights. You no longer shrink to fit the room, the room quietly expands to match your frequency. This evolution leads you to the next chapter, the Empire phase of your story. The cards speak of the Emperor and the Strength archetypes humming through your chart like double shots of cosmic espresso. Discipline has become your love language. It's an odd turn for a Sagittarius, a sign famous for treating routine like a dirty word, but this year you're discovering that real freedom requires architecture. You've learned that saying yes to everything is a subtle way of abandoning yourself, and that boundaries aren't fences, they're irrigation lines for purpose. Every no you deliver to distraction is a silent yes whispered to your destiny. There's power in that restraint, and it looks good on you. You may have noticed that your social circle feels smaller, more deliberate. That's not isolation, it's refinement. You've stopped handing out front row tickets to people who never learned to clap. Detachment, for you, is not a cold shoulder but a clean window. It's clarity with better posture. The cosmos tends to respond faster when your maybe becomes a decisive no, because indecision confuses both angels and algorithms. And yes, someone may currently be receiving your distance and interpreting it as arrogance. Let them. Spiritual growth is rarely flattering to bystanders. You're not being difficult, you're being directed. If you're single, brace yourself for the paradox of the Emperor phase. As you stop chasing, you become magnetic. The next person drawn to you won't be another emotional toddler in adult shoes. They'll have presence, maturity, and that quiet kind of confidence that matches your pace stride for stride. It's the Empress-level energy you've secretly been waiting for, the kind that doesn't compete with your independence but complements it. You'll recognize them not by fireworks but by peace, that peculiar feeling that your heart, for once, isn't auditioning. But even as your future sharpens, the past insists on one last cameo. The Seven of Swords energy lingers, a manipulative ex, a jealous co-worker, someone whose default setting is sneakiness wrapped in politeness. They lurk, they watch, they send telepathic hey-s at ungodly hours, and they might even applaud your success while quietly resenting it. Don't panic, this is not relapse, it's review. The universe is running a security patch. Every time the Trickster archetype reappears, it's not to sabotage you but to confirm that you've outgrown the lesson. In Buddhist teaching, the devil figure Mara doesn't vanish when enlightenment nears, he simply switches tactics, offering you your old comfort zones at a discount. The sales pitch is always the same: buy one habit, get regret-free. Decline the offer politely and keep walking. You don't need to fight temptation when you can simply outgrow it. In professional life, however, a note of caution: your brilliance has become visible enough to cast shadows. Someone near your orbit admires and envies you in equal measure. That's not a reason to shrink, it's a reason to safeguard. Share inspiration, not blueprints. The difference between generosity and exposure is timing. You're no longer the wide-eyed optimist who mistakes transparency for trust. You understand that even emperors hold counsel in private rooms. The kingdom you're building requires discretion, not secrecy. It's the wisdom of someone who knows that too many opinions spoil intuition. What's remarkable about this chapter is how naturally power and peace coexist in you now. You're no longer fueled by urgency but by understanding. The healer and the emperor, the heart and the structure, are no longer fighting for dominance. They've learned to dance. You've mastered the art of leading without controlling, of loving without losing yourself, and of laughing at the absurdity of it all. That's what true Sagittarian wisdom looks like, an unshakable spirit wearing humor like armor. So, as you move through the rest of this year, remember that your light doesn't need validation, your discipline doesn't require applause, and your boundaries don't need justification. Your task isn't to fix or prove anymore, it's to embody. You heal by existing authentically, you lead by walking steadily, and you teach by example without sermon. And perhaps the funniest irony of all is this: In learning to care less about being understood, you've become the person everyone suddenly wants to understand. The universe has impeccable timing, Sagittarius. It waits until you stop performing to give you the spotlight. Every great story has a moment when the camera pans out, the music swells, and the hero finally turns toward the horizon. That's where you are now, Sagittarius. The cinematic exit. The Eight of Cups has shown up in your energetic landscape like a director cueing your next scene, and it isn't about running away or dramatic declarations. It's about walking away from what no longer nurtures you, not in bitterness but in reverence. You've reached the sacred art of goodbye, the kind that doesn't slam the door but gently closes it with gratitude. When you leave, you bless the ground you're leaving, trusting that whatever grows there next will be good for whoever stays. That's spiritual adulthood in motion. And what happens when you exit with grace? You magnetize new beginnings. The energy of the Two of Cups emerges, a genuine connection built on mutual recognition rather than repetition. Add that to your 8 and you get 10, the 10 of Cups, the emotional jackpot of the tarot. It's the kind of love that doesn't feel like fireworks but like oxygen after years of holding your breath. Still, the universe, with its flair for irony, loves a good encore. Before the new door opens, someone from your past will send one last performance piece, a text dressed up as closure but secretly coded as control. They'll say they've changed, and perhaps they have, but their favorite yoga pose remains denial. You, however, have graduated from that class. Smile, nod, and let the door close itself. You're not escaping, you're simply walking toward sunlight. While your emotional life gets its dramatic lighting, your career arc starts to look suspiciously like divine choreography. The Magician and Judgment cards are at play here, signaling that all the work you thought went unnoticed was being silently tallied by the cosmos. Promotions, projects, recognition — these aren't random rewards, they're receipts. You've been doing the invisible labor of believing in yourself in the dark, and now the world's finally switching the lights on. This is not luck, this is alignment. The moment your inner critic stops heckling, the universe starts applauding. Think of it as cosmic accounting, the wheel of fortune turning in your favor, not out of generosity but justice. The hours you spent doubting yourself have accrued interest. Expect the emotional back pay to show up in the form of financial progress or long overdue recognition. Sagittarians are manifestation pros, but not the vision board kind. You manifest by moving. Your dreams require motion like fire needs oxygen. Gratitude, for you, isn't about pretending everything's fine, it's about noticing what's alive. Celebrate the tiny wins the way you would a grand finale, because the universe measures faith in enthusiasm, not scale. The more joy you broadcast, the faster the wheel spins. Somewhere in October, you'll notice your energy becoming strangely efficient, less chasing, more attracting. It's not that opportunities are suddenly abundant, it's that you've stopped leaking your power into proving yourself. You've replaced hustle with presence, and the world can feel the difference. But of course, just as the soundtrack starts to crescendo, the plot throws in a familiar twist. Around the third week of October, someone makes a reappearance, a character who left the story pages ago but suddenly wants to rewrite their role. They'll charge in like a chariot, fast, emotional, full of speeches about destiny but with the tactical finesse of a toddler trying to parallel park. You, however, are operating on Four of Swords energy now, calm, detached, maybe even asleep. Their urgency doesn't impress you anymore, it only reminds you how far you've come. They might plead, promise, or philosophize, but your heart remembers the tuition you already paid in tears. That was an expensive education, and you have no interest in auditing the same course twice. The Three of Swords makes a quiet but pointed appearance here to remind you that repeating a lesson isn't extra credit, it's procrastination. Closure this time won't arrive wrapped in dialogue, it will arrive in indifference. You'll know you've healed when you no longer need to explain your piece to someone committed to misunderstanding it. That's the new maturity, the understanding that silence can be the most articulate boundary. It's not cruelty, it's self-respect in fluent translation. From a psychological angle, what's unfolding is a transition from external validation to internal coherence. You've stopped measuring your worth in mirrors and started locating it in your own reflection. Spiritually, it's the Buddhist middle path in practice, moving neither toward attachment nor aversion but through awareness. You've realized that healing isn't the absence of pain, it's the absence of compulsion to revisit it. The old connections may still test your boundaries, not because you're weak but because you're strong enough to maintain them. Every re-entry attempt is an exam, and this time, Sagittarius, you're grading it yourself. Humor helps, as always. If someone resurfaces claiming enlightenment, assume Mercury's in retrograde and their Wi-Fi to reality is spotty. Respond with compassion, not curiosity. You've reached a point where even your detachment is an act of love for your time, your sanity, your next chapter. And while it might sound lofty, this is where real freedom begins, when peace stops being something you pursue and becomes the atmosphere you live in. By the end of the month, you'll find that what once felt like endings are simply edits. The Eight of Cups taught you to leave gently, the Magician taught you to create deliberately, and the Chariot's failed return taught you that not every past deserves a sequel. The camera pans again. You walk forward, lighter, laughing at how much of life feels like déjà vu until it doesn't. You understand now that closure doesn't require witnesses, just wisdom. And as you move toward what's next with no fanfare, no apology, and no looking back, you finally realize the most cinematic truth of all: the story wasn't about who stayed or who returned. It was always about who you became when you decided to keep going. Among the many constellations of your life, Sagittarius, the brightest stars aren't always the ones twinkling right in front of you. Sometimes, they're the faint, quiet ones that endure while the noisy ones burn out. Spirit is offering a small but significant nudge this month. Check your social orbit. A few acquaintances may be wearing friend badges they never earned. It's not betrayal, at least not in the cinematic sense that makes for good gossip, it's simple inventory. The Seven of Swords hovering near your career and community zone hints at subtle competition or political undercurrents, little dramas that unfold around conference tables, creative teams, or group chats that promise collaboration but smell faintly of rivalry. No need to panic, you've seen this movie before. The moral is always the same: speak with grace, record with receipts, and let your results do the talking. Integrity has better stamina than intrigue. You don't need to chase credibility when authenticity already does your public relations for you. In a culture that rewards noise, your quiet competence has started to sound like music. The Buddhists would call this karma's long game. What's built on sincerity eventually stands, while what's built on flattery eventually trips on its own shoelaces. It's worth noting, too, that you've evolved from trying to be liked to being trusted. That's a spiritual promotion. Sagittarius energy, at its highest octave, doesn't need validation, it generates it. You've learned to navigate human groups like an anthropologist, amused but detached, kind but discerning. That mix of humor and distance is your secret armor. And in this particular season, it's keeping you from absorbing the emotional static of others. You've stopped mistaking other people's projections for your responsibilities. What you're learning, perhaps painfully but beautifully, is that boundaries are not walls, they're windows with better locks. And just as you refine your circle, the universe widens your horizon. The Four of Wands appears as your final chapter card for this cycle, a sign of stability, celebration, and belonging. Expect an event that reroutes your map in the best possible way. Maybe a reunion that revives your optimism, a workshop that sparks a new vocation, or even an impulsive weekend trip that rewrites your 5-year plan on a napkin. It won't feel like destiny at first, more like serendipity wearing sneakers, but in hindsight, you'll realize it was both. Around this, the Knight of Wands energy flares to life, reminding you that enthusiasm isn't immaturity, it's evidence of resurrection. After seasons of spiritual seriousness, you're finally allowed to enjoy your own momentum. For a sign that thrives on movement, this return of joy is less a luxury than a homecoming. You can be responsible and radiant at the same time. Buddha would call that the middle path between austerity and indulgence, and frankly, it looks good on you. Meanwhile, the wheel of fortune turns audibly in your favor. In practical terms, this could manifest as a contract, a new home, a creative opportunity, or even just the unmistakable feeling that your joy has finally become sustainable. It's not a manic high, it's equilibrium. You're realizing that happiness doesn't have to be chased, it can be curated, like sunlight through open blinds. This phase rewards those who learn to sit through uncertainty without turning it into melodrama. The more you allow life to unfold without over-narrating it, the more generously it delivers. Every Sagittarius reading eventually circles back to the same cosmic thesis: freedom requires awareness. You can't aim your arrow if your eyes are closed. The real problem in your life was never the ex, the office gossip, or the delayed breakthrough, it was forgetting how sacred your curiosity is. When a Sagittarius stops exploring, the world loses a continent of insight. Your nature is both philosopher and wanderer, and when you starve either, your fire dims. The year of triumph 2025 is your reminder to keep both alive, to stay curious but grounded. Study what fascinates you until it becomes medicine. Travel not to escape yourself but to expand your vocabulary for awe. Your humor, your observations, your spontaneous acts of kindness, these are the universe's favorite instruments, and it plays its best symphonies through you. The world doesn't need you to be perfect. It needs you to keep wondering. Remember, chosen ones don't chase miracles, they become proof of them. And because we can't end a Sagittarius forecast without comic relief, let's talk about the fine print of enlightenment. If an ex appears declaring, "I've changed," treat it like an internet pop-up ad, close the tab. If a coworker suddenly turns into your biggest fan, assume Mercury's testing your patience, not blessing your inbox. And while we're being practical, hydrate. You can't spell enlightenment without water. Well, technically you can, but it ruins the metaphor. Humor is your spiritual pH balance, keep it handy. Looking back across this extraordinary stretch of your life, you can finally see the logic in the chaos. You began the year thinking you were losing everything familiar. You end it realizing you were simply shedding what was false. The storm wasn't destroying your map, it was updating your coordinates. Every setback was secretly a GPS recalibration. Now you stand at the threshold of a new chapter, bow steady, heart lighter, eyes wiser. Your power no longer comes from prediction but from presence. You've stopped trying to outrun fate and started walking alongside it. So breathe, Sagittarius. The crisis that once seemed fatal was merely narrative tension. The secret that comes to light this month will liberate more than it wounds. And the love that's arriving next, whether romantic, communal, or self-directed, will understand your silence better than anyone ever understood your explanations. That's the beauty of growth. Words become optional when energy becomes clear. The philosopher in you already knows this truth. Freedom is not the absence of responsibility, it's the mastery of response. And the humorist in you knows something equally profound, that laughter is enlightenment with better timing. So keep laughing, keep learning, keep aiming your arrow toward whatever horizon still makes your pulse quicken. As you move forward into the bright sprawl of 2025, may your arrows fly straight, your laughter echo long, and your victories remind the cosmos why it chose you for the starring role in this particular lifetime. Because it did. Because you are one of the chosen ones, not by title, but by temperament. The world needs your curiosity, your fire, and that irrepressible Sagittarian grace that can turn even heartbreak into higher education. If this reading resonated with you, let it be a small act of faith to share it. Like it, leave your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel Zodiac Talks Tarot. Here, we don't just read the stars, we translate them into stories of resilience, humor, and human wonder. Until next time, keep your bow aimed true, your heart open wide, and your eyes on the next horizon waiting to be explored.